Friends multiply joys and they divide sorrows. That's why Paul says in Romans 12:15 to rejoice with those who rejoice and weep with those who weep, because um, joys are less meaningful when there's no one to rejoice with you. Something good happens to you, you're just dying to call somebody on the phone, and there's nobody who would care about the good thing, and so it just loses some of its impact. On the other hand, burdens feel overwhelming when there's no one who can sympathize with you and help you bear up under those burdens. We know from life experience that pouring out our hearts to trusted friends and getting troubles off our chest, it lifts the weight, it brings relief. Tonight we're going to look at Psalm 13. It's a psalm of suffering and lament, and in this psalm we see the value of sharing our troubles with God, who is our truest friend. Psalm 13 is believed to have been written by David. He is given credit for writing it, and from the context, it's very clear that David writes this psalm during a tough time, during a difficult period of life. Now, we don't know the specific trouble that David is facing. It's possible, and in fact, perhaps likely, that he's being pursued by a very formidable enemy, such as King Saul. And when David writes, he doesn't feel like God is coming to his rescue, and so he probably feels like a lot of us feel as we see the current situation with the disease that's spreading around by a virus. We don't know when that situation is going to end, and we wonder, when's it going to be over? And he feels impatient. He feels frustrated. And David is very authentic as he gives his complaints to God. He is honestly in a dark frame of mind when he begins to write. But what we're going to see, and this is the cool thing about this psalm, is that David's frame of mind will steadily improve as he pours out his troubles to God. But in Psalm 13, the first 4 verses, David is going to put his troubles into words. So if you would, read along with me. Again, Psalm 13, beginning in verse 1, David says, "How long, Lord, will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? How long must I wrestle with my thoughts, and day after day have sorrow in my heart? How long will my enemy triumph over me? Look on me and answer, Lord my God. Give light to my eyes, or I will sleep in death. And my enemy will say, I have overcome him, and my foes will rejoice when I fall." And you can see here, it's, again, like I said, it's obvious. As David writes, he feels alone. He feels forsaken by God. He's struggling with doubts about God's care. Psalm 13, verse 1, he says, "Will you forget me forever?" Some of us may be thinking, is God forgetting about us right now? He feels like it's up to him to fix his own situation. In verse 2, he says, how long must I take counsel in my own soul? David feels overwhelmed. He feels sorrowful. He feels depressed. He feels hopeless. He says, how long must I have sorrow in my heart all the day? Verse 2. He's anxious. He feels like his enemy is going to get the better of him. He says, how long shall my enemy, verse 2 again, how long shall my enemy be exalted over me? The road David is on seems too long, and he doesn't see relief ahead of him. I remember one time I went into a railroad tunnel, the longest railroad tunnel in Texas, and it's kind of curved like a bow, and you walk into it, and after a while you get to the middle and you can't see where you went in, but you also can't see the opening at the other end. It's a little unnerving when you can't see that light at the end of the tunnel. Psalm 13, verse 1, he says, how long, O Lord, will you forget me forever? And 4 times David begins his question with the words, how long? He feels an urgent need for God's help. He feels that if God doesn't deliver him soon, he'll die. Verse 3, he says, consider and answer me, O Lord my God. Light up my eyes, lest I sleep the sleep of death. David is dismayed by the thought that his enemy will defeat him and gloat about it. In verse 4, he says, lest my enemies say, I have prevailed over him, lest my foes rejoice because I'm shaken. David is miserable, but in his sorrow, as we've already seen, David is making a wise move. And it's probably a move that if you're not making it, you ought to be making it. He's giving his troubles to God. 1 Peter 5 verse 7, Peter counsels us to cast all of our anxieties before God. The reason? Because he cares for us. That's the reason that Peter gives in his inspiration. In Philippians 4 verses 6 and 7, Paul gives us similar counsel. He says, don't be anxious about anything, but in everything by prayer and supplication let your requests be made known to God. And the peace that passes understanding will guard your hearts and minds in Christ Jesus when you do that. Always works, always appropriate. We're not told how God rescues David from the crisis that he's facing in Psalm 13, whatever that crisis may be. In verses 5 and 6, however, we're going to see David's darkness as he candidly gives his troubles to God. We're going to see David's darkness turn to expectant hope precisely because I believe he has made that wise move of giving God his sorrow. We'll see the weight lift from David's shoulders when David hands his troubles over to God, when David honestly pours out his heart to God. Verses 5 and 6, let's read. David says, but I trust in your unfailing love, and my heart rejoices in your salvation. I will sing the Lord's praise, for he has been good to me. So notice that transition, the transformation, the change. Having begun to write in desperation, David finishes with renewed hope. He remembers to lean on what he believes about God rather than reacting to what he sees in his current circumstances. And he follows, again, the wisdom that his son Solomon would later share in Proverbs 3 verse 5. Solomon would write, trust in the Lord with all your heart and do not lean on your own understanding. I've noticed again and again in my own life, you look toward the future and you think you know what's coming, and let me tell you, you're way off base. You have no idea. Crystal and I have recently been in situations where we thought, wow, there's no way we're going to make it through this. And God comes to the forefront and acts in ways that we couldn't have anticipated in a million years, with solutions we would never have thought possible. And when you quit leaning on what you understand or what you think you know, and you quit trusting, you begin to trust that God is going to go out in front of you and act in ways that exceed your expectations, you won't be disappointed. And that's why Paul says in 2 Corinthians 5 verse 7, for we walk by faith and not by sight. So David, having vented his troubles to God, having cast his anxieties before God, David once again remembers God's mercy and his steadfast love. Again, in verse 5, he says, but I have trusted in your steadfast love. And David doesn't yet see God's deliverance from this crisis, but he's once again able to believe that God's salvation will come and that he will rejoice in that salvation when it does come. In verse 5, he says, but I have trusted in your steadfast love. My heart shall, notice the prediction, the confident prediction, my heart shall rejoice in your salvation because I know you will save me. So after David vents his troubles to God, David remembers God's track record. David remembers that God has never let him down. David feels assurance that God will come through for him again, just like he always has. In Psalm 13 verse 6, he says, I will sing the Lord's praise, for he has been good to me. David is confident that he'll be seen because he's confident that God will deal bountifully with him. David believes that God will see him through this tough time. David believes that he will once again sing for joy to the Lord. So Psalm 13, the Psalms are wonderful because they are windows into the hearts and the minds of the psalmists. And David, Psalm 13 is a window into the thoughts and the struggles of a man after God's own heart. Now, David's faith had his low points. There were times when he forgot to obey God and it brought great trouble on him. David sometimes had doubts about God. He was sometimes impatient with God's timing, but David didn't hold back. He candidly and honestly told God how he felt. And David, in so doing, David was like the father of a demon-possessed boy who in Mark 9:24 said to Jesus, I believe, help my unbelief. And sometimes we're like that. Well, we need to ask for the help. And you know what happened? When that man with a demon-possessed boy said to God, I believe, said to Jesus, I believe, help my unbelief, Jesus healed that boy. He cleansed that boy of that demon. He didn't let the man down. When David channeled his distress into prayer, he once again remembered to walk by faith. David, a lot of us probably feel pretty weary in our current situation. We're ready for life to get back to normal. David grew weary from life's troubles, just like us. But time and again, we have to remember how to restore, how to be renewed. Time and again, David went to God in prayer, and his good shepherd refreshed him and restored him. In the 23rd Psalm, one of the best loved Psalms, Psalm 23, verse 2, David talks about the way that God refreshes him as a shepherd refreshes his weary sheep. David says, Psalm 23, verse 2, he makes me to lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. Notice he restores my soul. Psalm 13 reminds us that godly people have trouble. Even so, we have a God who will be with us all the way through our troubles. Again, Psalm 23, verse 4, David says, even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me, your rod and your staff, they comfort me. We have a God who won't let our troubles destroy us. Moreover, Romans 8, 38 and 39, Paul makes the point eloquently that nothing we face can separate us from the love of God. You don't have to go through troubles alone. You know, right now we can get in touch with each other. We have phones, we have technology that allows us to stay in contact even though we're supposed to be socially distanced and in quarantine as the case may be. But we have to realize that even without the technological blessings we have, we don't ever have to face our troubles alone because we have a God who will be right there with us no matter what we face.